bonjour ou rebonjour. Merci d'être là. Nous avons une table ronde qui est consacrée cet après-midi à la situation dans l'Est de l'Europe qui est intitulée « Quel ordre dans le chaos? What order in the chaos ?» Ce qui est qui peut paraître un peu décalé, disons, dans la mesure où on a plus l'impression aujourd'hui que le chaos est beaucoup moins en Europe de l'Est que, par exemple, dans les rues de Paris. Mais néanmoins, cette problématique est importante, intéressante et importante, puisque c'est quand même un caillou dans la chaussure des Européens depuis un bon moment déjà, et on a une situation qui est en voie de pourrissement d'une certaine manière, même si elle a quitté un peu la une de l'actualité depuis quelques mois, malheureusement au profit de ce qui se passe en Syrie, par exemple. Mais l'un des points communs, notamment avec la situation au Moyen-Orient, c'est le rôle particulier que veut jouer ou que l'on souhaite voir jouer à la Russie, qui est un acteur qui, ces derniers mois, s'est imposé comme un acteur de premier plan, ce qui n'est pas sans compliquer un peu la position des Européens sur ce dossier ukrainien. Et donc, pour toutes ces raisons, je pense qu'il était important, évidemment, de maintenir la discussion de cet après-midi et d'essayer d'en retirer quelque chose. Alors, je vais vous présenter nos 4 panélistes de l'après-midi. Immédiatement à ma gauche se trouve le Volodymyr Khandohiy, l'ancien ministre des Affaires européennes ukrainien. À sa gauche, Carmen Liliana BURLACU, qui est en poste comme vice-ministre des Affaires étrangères de Roumanie. Cyril Svoboda, que vous connaissez maintenant si vous étiez là avec nous ce matin, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères, ancien vice-premier ministre de la République tchèque, et Marc Ellenbogen, que j'ai plaisir à retrouver cette année encore, qui est le président, le chairman de la Global Panel Foundation. Eh bien, mesdames, messieurs, peut-être pouvons-nous commencer avec un petit point de la situation sur le terrain. Parce que je disais à l'instant, la situation en Ukraine a peut-être temporairement quitté la une de l'actualité, mais nous avons quand même observé ces dernières semaines des signes de tension, des échanges de tirs entre des séparatistes et des loyalistes ukrainiens dans le Donbass. La première question, peut-être que je vais me tourner naturellement vers M. Khandohiy, pour commencer, c'est peut-être de nous faire un petit résumé de la situation actuelle en Ukraine. Est-ce que, à votre avis, nous sommes à la veille d'une reprise des hostilités, d'une nouvelle offensive des séparatistes, par exemple?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak here today, and I think it was very much to the benefit to everybody to discuss the situation, not only in Ukraine, but in Eastern Europe, maybe at large, but of course focusing on Ukraine. You mentioned the headlines, but I can tell you that Ukraine always was trying to be on the front pages, but the minute we appeared on the front pages of newspapers and media, we were not happy about that. We would rather not under the circumstances. We have appeared on the front pages because of the situation which is unfolding in Ukraine. And to sum up this situation, I would like to stress that it's not very good. Of course, if you look at it from the point of view of chaos and order, I think that chaos and order are the two sides of the same coin. You flip the coin and you go from order to chaos. Look at Paris these days. I mean, it was all in order. You flip the coin, today there is a chaos. In Ukraine, pretty much the same happened. Ukraine was the emerging democracy, developing its institutions until late 2013, when someone in Moscow decided that European integration, the ambition to become the member of the European Union, is a bad choice for Ukrainians. Of course, Ukrainians didn't accept that. They went to demonstrate, and the whole thing started. We ended up in having part of our territory annexed by our big neighbor, Russian Federation, that is Crimea. We also ended up in the situation when there is a fight, real fight, in the eastern part of Ukraine, which is being instigated by outside forces, namely being instigated and fueled from Russia. So today, I unfortunately cannot say that we are very close to the solution of this situation. Yes, we do have agreements, or rather we have, for the time being, one agreement, which is called Minsk Agreement, that is a roadmap to the peace in the region. I mean, the region is the eastern part of Ukraine. But like President Kagame of Rwanda said at the opening of this conference, absence of violence does not mean peace. Peace is the mindset. And I totally agree with him and with those who really think that the peace is the mindset. It's a mindset of a country that is neighboring my country. But unfortunately, I cannot say that in their minds they have peace. For us, the European choice is a natural choice. And that's why we also want to demonstrate that no one would threaten us to the extent that we would resign from our natural choice to become member of the European Union, and for that matter, even to develop closer relations with NATO. This is also an important element of the overall picture in Ukraine, our aspiration to become a member of NATO. For many years, this was a debatable issue. Not the majority of the population supported it until recently. But overnight, after this occupation and the annexation of Crimea happened, the number of those who supported the NATO integration jumped to almost 60%, from 30% that we used to have just 2 or 3 years ago. So people realized that only collectively you can withstand attempts to be dictated what you have to do, not to do what you want to do. So are we expecting further deterioration of the situation? We have to be very, very cautious. We have to expect anything. Despite the fact that the active phase of the, let's say, of the fight is not longer there, but every day we have reports, and as we speak, this today, or rather overnight, 5 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in Donbass. So the shootings are still going on, the attacks are still going on, although Minsk agreements are being, let's say partially implemented. What will be the next step? It would probably be interesting to realize what we are driving at now, exactly. The next step, I think, should be elections. As you know, just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago rather, we had local elections in the majority of the regions of Ukraine, except for those areas which are currently under the control of the separatists, or even, I would think, it will be fair to say, under the control of terrorists. So how to conduct elections in those areas? This is the big question. Now the parliament is working on a modalities of the law which would allow to hold elections in those territories. This is the mega important task. And how we will be able to do about it, we'll see. But certainly, and I want to emphasize that we will not hold any kind of elections under the barrel of the guns. Unless we secure the border, Ukraine would secure the border with the Russian Federation on the east of the country. Until that time, no elections will be taking place. So I think I will stop here because we'll have probably another round.
Yes, we'll go maybe further on a few questions that you raised. Madame BURLACU, en tant que ministre adjoint des Affaires étrangères de Roumanie, quelle est la position, et en tant que membre de l'Union européenne, parmi les membres les plus récents de l'Union européenne, est-ce que vous-même, votre gouvernement, vous êtes en totale sympathie avec la revendication des Ukrainiens d'adhérer aussi à l'Union européenne, ou est-ce que vous pensez que c'est un point de départ un peu difficile, c'est-à-dire que présenter ça comme quelque chose de non négociable, au fond, c'est peut-être le meilleur moyen de ne pas trouver un terrain d'entente avec l'autre grand acteur du dossier qui est la Fédération de Russie.
Bonjour, non, non, pas du tout. Je crois qu'on devrait rester ferme sur nos principes.
Rapprochez un peu le micro, voilà.
Non, vous savez très bien que la Roumanie supporte entièrement les positions d'Ukraine. On a toujours essayé d'expliquer aux gens, et j'aimerais bien souligner cette chose, qu'on devait être très attentif parce que nous savons que les Russes sont experts dans les soi-disant conflits gelés. Et j'ai voulu aussi développer un petit peu, et bien sûr que nous sommes très concernés de ce qui se passe en Ukraine, et malheureusement, même si la situation dans le monde est assez difficile, nous ne devrons pas oublier ce qui se passe là. J'ai aussi voulu vous dire que nous devrons être très attentifs à ce qui se passe avec nos amis de Russie, parce que une fois ils sont experts dans cette sorte de conflit à long terme. Et je pense maintenant de la situation de la 14e armée en Transnistrie, qui est toujours là. Je pense maintenant à la Géorgie. Nous avons tous vu ce qui s'est passé avec l'Arménie. Alors, je crois que l'Ukraine doit être aidée, soutenue, bien sûr, sans être, comment dirais, stupide et forçant la note avec les amis russes. Mais on devait être très attentif parce qu'ils sont experts dans ce type d'actions qui à long terme, leur offrent des avantages.
Monsieur Svoboda, venant d'un pays aussi qui a la Tchécoslovaquie qui s'est scindée en deux, est-ce que vous pensez que la question des frontières est une... Madame BURLACU a parlé de la Transnistrie notamment. Est-ce que vous pensez que la question des frontières est taboue, complètement taboue, ou bien est-ce que, on l'a vu avec la Crimée, peut-être que demain il peut y avoir est-ce qu'on peut envisager peut-être une scission de l'Ukraine, pays qui semble vraiment coupé en deux, enfin aujourd'hui?
Thank you. You are right. Under the period of Czechoslovakia, we were a neighboring country to Ukraine. And part of Ukraine was part of the former Czechoslovakia between the wars. So we are keeping very friendly relations with the Ukrainians. No doubt, Ukraine is to be fully sovereign state, and Ukraine is to have a free choice as far as the destiny of Ukraine concerned. But, you know, from my perspective, the conflict is a global one. EU is to be enlarged. And EU wants to be fully integrated and strong enough for expanding. At the same time, Russia has different interests in protecting and in having the influence in the areas where is a Russian-speaking population. The Europeans are saying that our interest is correct because it is a democratic one. Russia is saying yes, but our interest is also correct because it is a historical one. And in my view, today, Ukraine is a victim of the global conflict because the Central Europe has been all the time under the influence of the two powers, Germany and Russia. And now we have to stop the war in Ukraine. And the problem is to what extent the Minsk process is a good instrument for achieving long-standing peace in Ukraine. Unfortunately or fortunately, it is the only tool we have in the hands. And look, a year ago, when we spoke on Ukraine, we read in the newspapers, Ukraine, 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 Ukraine. And today, we read migration, migration, migration. Slightly, the interest of Europe has been changed. And the problem is that now we need to find a solution. And the solution is to find a way how to agree, how to achieve common or mutually acceptable solution between Ukraine, Russia, and Germany and France, I mean EU. Why? Because Ukraine is divided. The east part of Ukraine is totally devastated. So Luhansk region, Donetsk region, all the regions, they are totally destroyed. There is no industry, no infrastructure, no hospitals. There is all the capable people, they moved from the east part of Ukraine to the west of Ukraine, or we have in my country 200,000 Ukrainians who are in the Czech Republic. So the time is to overcome some obstacles and to find a compromise, because as I said this morning, so a permanent conflict with Russia is very counterproductive. But it is not up to the EU just to give up the position and say, we do accept the Russian position because this is the only correct position. So we need to negotiate, and that's why I believe that that Angela Merkel is the only respectable person from the Czech, from the European political elite. So my position is that we need to find a compromise. Final point. I have some friends in Russia, and I spoke with some friends maybe a month ago. We spoke about Ukraine, and I said, so what's your position on Ukraine? And the answer was very nice. It was in Russian, my nezainteresovany. So we have no interest, because the east part of Ukraine is extremely costly. Now there's a question of the bill. Who will pay the bill? The reconstruction of the East Ukraine. Who will pay the reconstruction of the railways, streets, roads, buildings, schools, etc.? Who is strong enough to invite people to come back? So this is extremely difficult, and that's why I am still repeating, Ukraine is just a victim. And very last point, very last. I am so sorry for saying what I am going to say. So this is the question of the future membership of Ukraine in NATO or in EU. Believe me, so to join EU or to join NATO is a question of very profound, very difficult transformation of the economic, political, and legal environment. It is extremely difficult. And I think it is not correct to promise the Ukrainians that Ukraine is capable of joining the two entities in very reasonable time. When I am joking and when I'm cynical, so I said on the Czech TV that I will die before EU, before NATO, before Ukraine joined NATO or EU, because I'm still in the good condition, health condition, but it is a very long-term strategy. Thank you.
Merci. Marc Ellenbogen, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce que vient de dire monsieur... Marc, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce que vient de dire monsieur Svoboda sur la question de l'adhésion à l'Union européenne? Il dit au fond, il ne le verra pas de son vivant, parce que c'est trop difficile et c'est trop compliqué. J'ajouterais peut-être, et je reviendrai peut-être là-dessus, sommes-nous vraiment certains que l'Union européenne veut continuer à s'élargir quand on voit aussi les tensions qui existent entre les nouveaux entrants, justement à propos de la crise des migrants en particulier, et l'Europe de l'Ouest. Hein. Donc, est-on aussi sûr qu'au fond, l'Union européenne cherche encore à agréger de nouveaux membres? Mais Marc, la question, je pense, est intéressante pour vous.
Basically, if the expectation is that a complete Ukraine with both the West and the East joins the EU and NATO, then of course I agree with Cyril Svoboda that it's going to be a long time. But I don't necessarily think that the issues in the Ukraine are worse than they were in Bulgaria, and I'm sorry, ma'am, in Romania and other Central and Eastern European countries before they joined, when they joined. And so, sorry, Minister Khandohiy, if the East is gone, then I can see Ukraine in NATO and in the EU in a shorter period of time. And I'll say that. And I think that I'm not sure if I see Ukraine as a unified country in the future. I know that's not what you all want to hear. So my answer is yes, I agree with Cyril. If the Ukraine is supposed to be changing itself, including both East and West, I think that the chances of them joining the EU are virtually nil.
Monsieur Khandohiy, ce que suggère un certain nombre d'intervenants, c'est que la solution, c'est peut-être effectivement une séparation de l'Ukraine, et que l'ouest de l'Ukraine, qui est la plus enthousiaste à l'idée d'adhérer à l'Union européenne, y adhère, et qu'au fond, l'Est russophone, qui a l'air de rester attaché au partenariat avec la Russie, vive sa vie d'une autre manière, comme c'est arrivé à d'autres pays de la région, d'Europe de l'Est.
And I'm sorry, Minister, before you beat me up, Minister, before you beat me up, I was absolutely opposed to Russia going into Crimea, and I wasn't a great fan of the split between East and West, but let's just start from there.
I'm not going to beat anybody, but the suggestion that Ukraine has a chance to join the European Union and NATO after being partitioned, I heard only from my colleague from my left, from my far left. I haven't heard anything like that from the other colleagues. But having said that, let me give you a little bit of geography. What we are talking about and what the situation on the ground is that 5%, only 5% of Ukrainian territory, I'm not talking about Crimea now, I'm talking about the continental Ukraine. 5% of the territory is under control of the so-called, rightly so, separatist and terrorist groupings. So we are not talking about splitting Ukraine into two equal parts, East and West. What we are talking about, once again, is a tiny strip of the territory which is on the far east of Ukraine. I do believe that sooner or later, or rather sooner than later, this part of Ukrainian territory will be reintegrated into Ukraine. And I don't even want to give a hint that we are going to compromise on that. I think this is the position not only of Ukrainian authorities, and I would like I haven't said that from the beginning, I do not represent any of the authorities from Ukraine now. I'm in my private capacity as the head of the NGO, a think tank. So I think that this position also is being shared by majority, not only from the EU countries, but worldwide. So we need to find an instrument. We need to find a format, how to stop the fighting and how to reintegrate that tiny strip of land on the eastern side of Ukraine into Ukraine. Yes, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Svoboda, that fortunately or unfortunately, we have only one instrument at hand, and that is Minsk Agreement. I personally believe that we have to expand. Yes, we do have to follow on the Minsk Agreement and try to implement step by step what is being inserted there. But we also have not exhausted, I think, other possibilities which we can find in the United Nations, for example. As you know, Ukraine was elected as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for the year 2016-2017. I'm not suggesting that we bring to the Security Council our own agenda, but I think we will be better equipped, being in the Security Council, to look for opportunities, how to deal with this situation through the instruments and modalities of the United Nations. So I would like to tell you that I do not expect, also as my colleagues, I do not expect Ukraine to become a member of NATO immediately or tomorrow, but we do realize, we know perfectly well that we need to do our homework. You will not find in Ukraine no one who just thinking about jumping into Ukraine. As you know, beginning from 1st January next year, an implementation of the, I think, landmark agreement will be started, and that is the association agreement between Ukraine and European Union, which include DCFTA, and that is a deep and comprehensive free trade area. I think 2 or 3 years ago, no one could have expected that we will reach the point when Ukraine and the EU would be cooperating on the basis of the association agreement. And the DCFTA is a part of our day-to-day business. So we've done our homework. That agreement had been signed. Russia tried to stop this agreement, and you know, we should have started implementing this agreement a year ago, but there were negotiations or consultations, rather, in the EU just to satisfy Russian, let's say, ambitions. They were not really successful. So from this January, this association agreement will be implemented no matter what. Thank you.
Deux petites questions pour vous, monsieur. D'abord, la première, vous avez mis la Crimée de côté. Est-ce que vous pensez que l'Ukraine doit faire son deuil de la Crimée? Et est-ce que vous-même, vous avez fait votre deuil de la Crimée?
No, no, no. No, absolutely. No, that was purposefully for the sake of argument. We were talking about the eastern part. Like I said, Crimea, it's another story. It's an equally important story. Maybe it is more important than the situation in the eastern part of Ukraine. From the legal point of view, I think personally that it is more complicated. But I think the fact that this territory of Ukraine was annexed is undeniable. We are looking forward to continue, and we will never forget Crimea, that's for sure, but simply to just separate these two issues, I didn't mention that. But we can talk at length about how and in which manner we are going to get these parts of Ukrainian territory back. I think here we are confronting enormous numbers of issues, but in the world there are too many instances of annexations, and many of them are still pending, but many of them have been resolved. So I think through the international law, through the United Nations, through the support of our friends, allies, we will be able to to bring back Crimea to Ukraine.
Et la deuxième question, c'est l'accord de libre-échange. Dans l'hypothèse de sanctions économiques de la part de la Russie, d'abord, est-ce que vous le craignez, est-ce que vous le redoutez? Et deuxièmement, qu'est-ce que vous attendez comme réaction à ce moment-là de l'Union européenne?
Well, this free trade agreement between Ukraine and the EU, it doesn't have anything to do with the sanctions that are being imposed by Russia on Ukraine, by Ukraine on Russia, and by the rest of the world on Russia. This is a separate set of, instruments that we will be developing in our cooperation with the EU. Yeah, we are living in a world of undeclared war, and it is as simple as that. So one should not expect the booming of trade, or bilateral trade between Russia and Ukraine. I read just recently that the percentage, the share of trade between Russia and Ukraine dropped to the 16%. Just a few years ago, 2 years ago, it was more than 50%. I think that the DCFTA would help Ukraine to ameliorate to this situation, and our trade will be oriented more to the Western countries, to the countries of the European Union.
Madame BURLACU.
Yeah, I would like to tell you that we should be very careful. We are not discussing here about the free will of the people who do want to change something in their own country. We are discussing here about changing the borders by force. And I think this is not acceptable. If we agree on that, we can go on. Because if we do not see that we have a very special situation now, that we are at war, as he said, because there was an aggression, and because that was an attempt to change by force the borders. Afterwards, if things will evolve in one way or another, and the people will choose another option, that will be the free will of the people. But in this particular moment, we are not there. And as I said before, we need to be very careful, because those Russian minorities were not forgotten there. They were put there on purpose. And the Russians have this policy of thinking as the great empires, as the Chinese, the others think, in millenniums, not in 100 years. So we have to be very careful and firm, because otherwise we will open the Pandora box all over the world. Second, I think it is very important for Ukraine, as for the other countries, as I mentioned, to allow them to have this European perspective. For us, for example, it was very important that we had to do our homework to become member of the EU and NATO, and it speed up a little bit our own internal process and our own efforts in order to adapt our economy and our lives to adjust to the EU requirements. I think this is also very important. And we saw the progress which was done in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Georgia, in the accession process. So I think it's very important for us to keep the European perspective for these countries. And third, I think we should be very careful, even in a format like this, that if we do discuss with a lot of concepts, this will allow people to have different interpretations. And I do not think it's good to bring into discussion the idea of secessionist, or I don't know, changing borders by referendum and changing borders by force, because it is not a good momentum, to be very honest. We are looking all over the world. I just came from Dakar, from the Forum on Security and Peace in Africa, so it's really boiling all over the world. I'm not sure it is the best momentum to come now with such proposals.
Monsieur Svoboda.
Now, I'm again terribly sorry, because I will be very provocative. The split of former Czechoslovakia, divorce, it was done on totally unconstitutional way. Because at that time, we had in our constitutional system the constitutional law saying that the split of the country must be based on a referendum. And we didn't organize any referendum. It was done in peaceful elegant way, we are keeping very friendly relation with the Slovaks. So I am against exporting the Czech scenario. One element. Second, if we read the Minsk Accord, Crimea is not incorporated. So if we want to achieve any result, so we have to be concentrated on Minsk agreement, because it is, as it was said, it is the only instrument we have today in our hands. So if we put anything additional to the box, we complicate, we create the situation more complicated. And if we read the speeches of representatives of the United States, Germany, UK, nobody is speaking about Crimea. I am sorry, but it is very complicated. It was said so, and I guess that we need to stop the war and to be concentrated on the Minsk process. That's very, very, very important. So, and last point, European perspective. Yes, I am from the bottom of my heart for giving the European perspective to our neighboring countries. But we started also the process of negotiation with Turkey in 1963. Too long. And we haven't accomplished the process yet. We are speaking about privileged partnership between Turkey and EU. And nobody knows to what extent it is a real strategy that Turkey joined the EU in very reasonable time. So I think that we have in our cards too many problems, and we have to play the game and to be successful. So still, my recommendation is to be concentrated on the peace in Ukraine and Syria, and to do everything what is possible for stopping the two wars, and to help Ukraine in the process of reconstruction. So, and it means that we have to be maybe more pragmatic, because we need to find some type of cooperation with all the partners. But if we raise again and again many problems, I think that we will create the situation more complicated. And yesterday's tragedy in France is calling us to stick together in the fight against terrorism. So that's the point number one, and we need to stick together and not to create any other conflicts and problems inside our family.
Pour élargir un peu, Marc, Ellenbogen, il me semble, vous me corrigerez si je me trompe, mais que pour élargir le problème, il faudrait peut-être dire que cette question de l'Ukraine nous interpelle parce qu'effectivement, il y a la violation du droit international, l'annexion par des moyens militaires d'une partie d'un État souverain, qu'il y a une guerre civile en cours en Ukraine. Mais c'est peut-être à replacer dans un contexte plus large géopolitique qui est quelles sont les ambitions de la Russie. La Russie passe son temps à dire qu'elle n'a pas d'ambition sur l'Ukraine, mais en même temps, elle estime que, au fond, ce qui est en train de se jouer là, c'est son standing vis-à-vis des États-Unis, et elle interprète l'Union européenne, dont la plupart des membres font partie aussi de l'OTAN, comme, au fond, une masse un peu hostile à sa porte. Et elle voit sa revendication et son action en Ukraine comme une espèce de défense de ses intérêts premiers. Est-ce que j'ai raison de poser la question en ces termes-là?
Well, I guess that really just depends on if I put on my military hat or my former presidential candidate advisor hat or, minister. funny enough, being accused of a leftist is kind of funny because they used to call me the vice chairman of the Republican wing of the Democratic Party. So having now achieved also being a leftist, I guess I'm a full circle. But, you know, the fact is, ich bin eigentlich Deutscher. Ich bin in Deutschland geboren. Ich bin dort aufgewachsen. I was born in Germany. I was raised there. I know what it's like to come from a family that's split. And I don't necessarily like the option of thinking in terms of whether we'll split or not. My grandmother was from Prague, as Cyril knows, and I've had a long relationship with Czechoslovakia and now the Czech and Slovak republics. The fact is, even in our lifetimes, and I'll get to your answer about Russia in 2 seconds, there have been a lot of geographical changes. There's Morocco and Sahara, there's the Czechs and the Slovaks, there's tons of things, Hungary, Austrian-Hungarian Empire, God knows how often borders have changed. Look at my own former country, how much land was taken from Germany, for rightful reasons, probably. I mean, when you open Pandora's box, you have to do, but I deal with realities. I'm a realist. And the fact is, I'd actually like the Ukraine to be part of NATO and the European Union very much. And if I can find a way to have that happen, and it also means changing the paradigm of the land despite Minister, that it's been done in a kind of improper way, and I agree with you that Crimea was annexed and it absolutely annoys the hell out of me. So I think the Russians are on the move again. I think that Vladimir Putin obviously planned that. He likes it. He's gotten Russia back into the public eye. And I think he's an extremely dangerous person. I regret to say that because actually we should be using the Russians, as Cyril Svoboda has said, in different things, in different issues where we've not used them and where we could, in fact, find cooperation. And I was telling people at lunch, Brian Cowan and Mustafa Kemal Kazi and a few people that, you know, I don't have an antipathy towards Russians, but I have a big problem with Vladimir Putin. So every time I answer a question about Russia, I see Putin jumping around my head, and that makes me nervous. So if I could remove that element of my thinking, I would have a different opinion in general about Russia than I have now, despite their history, despite the fact that I agree that they took populations and plopped them into different places, whether it was Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and so on. So my answer to you is, I do think Russia's on a foremarch. I agree that that's one of Putin's policies. And of course, he's also managed to make it look like it's the tail wagging the dog, and that is every time the U.S. takes a step, it's because he's taking the first step.
Qui veut réagir à ça? Monsieur Svoboda, allez-y, Monsieur Khandohiy.
Thank you very much. Just a few observations. First of all, regarding the split of Czechoslovakia, of course, each and every situation is totally different. But I may say that you were lucky. Your divorce was by mutual consent, and unfortunately, we do not have that situation. We did not have that situation in the Soviet Union when it split apart, but we finally managed at that time, in the early 90s, to agree on basic things, but how to live. And the basic thing, one of the most important things was to keep the borders intact. I'm not even talking about the OSCE, agreement and the fixation of the inviolability of borders in Europe since 1975. I'm not going to go into the history of the World War I or II, but since the modern period, since the beginning of the OSCE as the space for living for many countries, annexation of Crimea was the only brutal violation of the international law. And I would like to tell you, rest assured, we did not and we will not forget the Crimea. And simply for the reasons I have just explained, we are not concentrating on it today. Honestly, we cannot, Ukraine as a country, cannot play on two chessboards. We have to settle down the situation in the eastern part of Ukraine, and then, of course, keeping in mind Crimea all the time, but then we'll be better equipped to deal with the situation of Crimea in the international institutions, including the Court of Justice, United Nations Court of Justice, and other places. And also, coming back to Turkey, with all due respect, to Turkey, you may understand that we are two totally different countries and totally different situations. So I'm not suggesting that we will be prepared to wait as long as Turkey waited, and still there is no fixed date for the accession of Turkey to the European Union, but probably that was the choice of Turkey to handle this situation that way. Certainly, and I would like to commend the mentioning by my Romanian colleague a situation about European perspective. Even though we are not expected to be in the European Union tomorrow, even day after tomorrow, but I cannot and we cannot understand why in our documents until now there is no there is no mentioning, there is no direct reference to Article 49 of the European Union Treaty, which open up doors to European Union for those states that have been prepared themselves to become the members. So I think the European perspective will help Ukraine to overcome internal frictions, internal problems that exist. Yes, there are plenty of them in Ukraine today, in economy, in the fight against corruption and other things, but it's a beacon. European perspective, or rather the perspective to become a member of the European would solidify efforts of Ukrainian people to reach that goal. We are not talking about time frame. As soon as we do it, we will be in the European Union. Thank you.
Petite question subsidiaire, Monsieur Khandohiy. Nous avons vu ce matin à quel point le terrorisme, la crise des réfugiés, donc la situation au Moyen-Orient, qui vient de la même endroit, allait nous obliger à nous rapprocher des Russes pour obtenir leur coopération dans ces deux combats pour ramener la paix au Moyen-Orient et pour lutter contre le terrorisme. Est-ce que vous ne craignez pas que l'Ukraine fasse un peu les frais de cette nouvelle nécessité? Est-ce que d'un certain point de vue, déjà, Madame Merkel et aussi François Hollande, qui ont été des avocats de la cause ukrainienne, n'aient pas d'autre chat à fouetter dans les mois qui viennent que de rester des défenseurs de premier plan de la cause ukrainienne?
Well, about this, about terrorism, I think there'll be another panel for that to discuss it in details. But I thought to myself this morning when I heard about these attacks in Paris that it's my personal opinion. There are three in the recent time, the most outrageous, the most horrible terrorist attacks. One, of course, is the 9/11 in New York. The second one, interestingly enough, over the territory of Ukraine when terrorists shoot down the Malaysian plane MH17. And the third one, today or yesterday in Paris. These three attacks happened in three different places, different continents even, but they are linked together. They tell us that the terrorism is the global issue and we have to confront this issue globally. But having said that, and while confronting this global issue globally, we should not forget, or we should not sort of hide some other problems that exist in the world. It should not distract our attention from resolving other issues that exist in the world today, including the situation in Ukraine with the annexation of its territory or the fueling up separatist movement in this country, in its eastern part. So I think we have to deal with while we are dealing with the terrorism globally, there are individual issues of individual countries that needs to be attended to. Thank you.
Qui voulait prendre la parole, Madame BURLACU ou Marc Ellenbogen? Je ne sais pas. Monsieur Svoboda.
I wanted just to say that you are right that we split the country under the different circumstances, but generally speaking, so to ask the people is the conditio sine qua non. So it is necessarily so to ask the people. So that you said that we are lucky. So that's the fact that we are divorced. And I am one of those who are not lucky for splitting the country. So, but that's the fact. And we are now keeping friendly relations with the Slovaks. That's true. That's true. But it is not true that everyone is happy because of the split of one country. So that's the one point. But second point, when I was campaigning for joining EU, I was in some rally. And I said, we will go to Europe. And small gypsy girl, she said, we will go to Europe, I will go with you. I said, no, we must stay here at home because we have a duty here, a very, very serious homework to change our country. And I think that still there is a dream and real life, and there's a still wide gap between the dream and the real life, because joining EU doesn't mean to fulfill 3 conditions, Copenhagen conditions. The first one, well-functioning free market economy. And it doesn't mean that everyone is capable of succeeding in the free market on the EU level. It's very challenging. The second is to transform the democracy in well-functioning democracy which is based on the rule of law. So it doesn't mean to transform judiciary, political system, everything. And very last point is to be capable of accepting all the duties which are incorporated in the EU rules, so acquis communautaire. So this is very serious homework, and I think that it is not fair to repeat again and again to the citizens in Ukraine, you have European perspective. That's true, you have. But we need to see a profound progress in your country. And the first step to be fulfilled is to stop the war. So it's a base we can, so we have to realize immediately, because it will be very difficult. And going back to the comment on Turkey, it is not just a decision of Turkey, because it is a very difficult process of negotiation between EU and Turkey. And I was minister when the European Council decided to open the negotiations. So, and it was even at the time a very delicate question, not only inside EU but also in Turkey. So I am from the bottom of my heart, so for the privileged partnership between Turkey and EU, to have very friendly relations, to have free movement of goods, free movement of persons, free movement of finances, everything. But I am not promising Turkey full-fledged membership, because it's not real. So I think that is in the world is better to be correct and to be open, not to be a dreaming persons of something which is not real.
Peut-être une observation et une question ensuite à Marc Ellenbogen. Peut-être que vous êtes un peu sévère, parce que quand vous dites qu'il faut arrêter la guerre pour entrer dans l'Union européenne, il ne faudrait peut-être pas oublier que c'est peut-être une guerre qui est imposée aussi, et il faut être 2 pour arrêter la guerre. Cela dit, je vous donne la parole juste après. Marc Ellenbogen, je voudrais avoir votre point de vue sur la même question que je posais tout à l'heure à M. Khandohiy. Est-ce que vous voyez, avec la situation qu'on a en Syrie, le terrorisme à Paris, vous pensez que les Européens, comme Mme Merkel ou François Hollande, sont toujours autant en situation de peser en faveur de la cause de l'Ukraine démocratique et de l'union de l'Ukraine? Est-ce qu'ils n'ont pas absolument besoin de ménager la Russie dans leur guerre contre l'État islamique?
You know, one of the things that happens when you get paid to think out of the box, which is what people pay me for, you come up with ideas that, of course, some people don't like, and you make comments that some people think maybe you're a nutter or an extremist or all those things. You know, I don't like the fact that we don't deal with Russia on certain issues, and to answer your question simply, yes, I think we should use them more prodigiously, and whoever we is, could be Europe, could be the US, could be Canada, Germany, to integrate them in certain operations that we have. And obviously, they're part of Partnership for Peace. We used to have joint military exercises with them, which we stopped. I thought it was a big mistake. And there are other areas. So that's a different thing than your question, which is whether we should suck up to Russia. And the answer is no, we shouldn't suck up to Russia. And basically, we shouldn't suck up to the Chinese either. Where we are prepared to interact with them because we need them and it's good for them and good for us, I think we can interact. But both systems have things that I purely dislike. They have to do with some of the things he talked about which don't apply to them, but justice and criminality and corruption and putting people in jail, and it goes on and on. And frankly, I think it's okay for us to have standards. And the reason that Ukraine is not going to make it into the EU anytime soon is because, frankly, you might say it's the Russians who went to war, but it was the Ukrainians who prepared the Russians to go to war by badly managing the Crimea, by badly managing eastern Ukraine, by not doing their homework 20 years ago and 10 years ago, and constant fights between Tymoshenko and between Yanukovych, and Yushchenko, and then comes Yanukovych and the blue and the red and the green and however it goes. And then, of course, you come around and say, well, we're victims, the Russians attacked us. It's true, and it's crap that they attacked you, but you did very little to settle the ground beforehand so that they'd have less of an opportunity to come in and attack you. And of course, I can blame the US also for not doing things which I would have done and they didn't do. So, you know, I think there's a difference whether you say these are the rules of the game and we're prepared to play by those rules, and where the Russians are prepared to play by the rules, and the Chinese too. I mean, after all, the US isn't the oracle on things, and we do a lot of things stupidly, as we can see what we've done in Syria. But I think we do follow certain standards, and then when you violate those standards, you should be coming back to the line that you set, and the standards should be, okay, we violated this, we made exceptions for EU, Bulgaria, Romania, who clearly didn't have the standards that were required, but we've now done it, and the next group will be Ukraine and Turkey. And that applies to Russia too. So that's my answer.
Monsieur Khandohiy, bien sûr.
First of all, having my current hat as the president of the non-governmental organization, I cannot but agree with what Marc just said, that Ukraine failed to do a lot that would have prevented Russia from doing what they've done. So I do agree with you that this constant fight, the political rivalry, which existed and does exist in Ukraine even today, contributed to the fact and to the situation which is we are facing now. But having said that, I also would like to bear with us that we are only let's say 25 years old next year, and this is a pretty short period of time for maturing. So immaturity of the governmental political institutions is partly the problem which we are facing today. And now, just responding, not responding really, but mentioning what Mr. Svoboda has just said. Yes, I can agree with you totally about the necessity to develop ourselves before you will be ripe for membership in any organization. But what I would resist a little bit to accept is the kind of a paternalistic approach to Ukraine from those countries that not so long ago have been in our own shoes. And after they have become members of the European Union, suddenly they have become sort of senior brothers to us. So, yes, we understand. Everything you said, we understand that we need to do that. And this is not about the perspective, purely perspective. It's about the reforms and reformation of our own country. We are doing it, honestly, we are not doing it just to jump into the European Union. We are doing it as a motivator to do reforms inside Ukraine. And one other thing, I think it was mentioned briefly, but I think that it's worthwhile addressing it a little bit more in detail, and that is about what is going on really in Ukraine. Is it the East-West confrontation, and Ukraine is only an object? Is this, as many are thinking, a confrontation between US and Russia, and Ukraine is a victim of that confrontation? My own answer is no. This is neither confrontation East-West nor confrontation Russia on the level of Russia, United States. It's an existential, civilizational confrontation between Ukraine and Russia. And what is going on is that, as one, I don't remember the name, of a journalist who I think very rightly said, that for Russia, future of Ukraine is in its past. So that's it, what it is indeed. The developing of forcing the relations of between Russia and Ukraine is it's a dead-end street. Ukraine has opted for another path, and I think we'll be pursuing it. So I think the rest of the world has to simply give a helping hand to Ukraine in order to overcome these existential or civilizational differences that exist between Ukraine and Russia. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On va peut-être en rester là, sur cette table ronde, de manière à ce que la table ronde que vous attendez tous sur la lutte contre le terrorisme puisse commencer à l'heure. Je voudrais vous remercier, tous les quatre, d'avoir participé à cet intéressant échange sur l'Ukraine, qui n'est peut-être pas effectivement, qui ne fait plus les gros titres des journaux, mais qui peut-être, il faut se méfier, peut-être amené à la faire à nouveau dans les mois qui viennent. Merci beaucoup, bonne fin d'après-midi avec l'Institut Amadeus. Merci.